The agenda this week reflected on whether Canada is a post-national country, learned why some places here could become uninsurable, and wondered what's next for Raptors basketball. The Agenda's Week in Review begins with how hard it is to get access to public information.
Tom and I spent 20 months investigating Canada's broken Freedom of Information system.
You say broken. You're convinced it's broken.
I mean, it's worse than broken, I think, in many ways. And what is so crucial is these laws exist for a reason. This is foundation of democracy stuff. And you see someone here, just a regular person who was trying to understand why they lost their job from a public institution. And it took, I think this was 2 years, this process that was going on. And just countless amount of resources and time spent in it. I think Brooks told us, this was almost like a part-time job for him, in addition to being a doctor and saving lives.
Tom, from my understanding of things, the Freedom of Information system is something that journalists mostly use. Do journalists have an easier time getting information than civilians?
Well, first, I think I challenge you on the idea that journalists are the primary users. They're actually, by far, they're a small minority of the system. Most users of the system are normal people, civilians, like Brooks, and their businesses. So it's people that are looking to learn more about their government, more about, the example I keep using is, trash pickup for the city that someone lives in. Like, why isn't my trash being picked up as frequently? Why am I paying more in this obscure tax? It's people asking questions like that, or people like Brooks trying to understand what happened in this complex process, happening 12 layers up from me. So first of all, I think, certainly there's a lot of people who are using the system who are not the people that you and I think of. But when it comes to journalists, I think we all know that there are fundamental problems with the Freedom of Information system, or systems in Canada, because we have one for every jurisdiction, province, territory, and the feds. We all know that there are all of these hoops that you have to jump through. There's so many issues that you encounter on a daily basis trying to just learn about a briefing note, like a letter written to a minister explaining a topic. We sometimes get involved in fights that take years. Robin and I have had FOIs that have taken 3, 4, 5 years to get answers on. And of course, by the time you get those documents, it's not super interesting or useful anymore. I'm still waiting on stuff from COVID.
From COVID, so from 3 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, we have the Information and Privacy Commissioner here, part of whose job is to, I guess, ensure that Ontarians get access to the information that is of relevance to them. How well do you think the system works?
I think the system can certainly use drastic improvements all around, and we can get into some of those solutions later. But I think Dr. Fallis's story is a really good example of why this really matters, why it matters to Ontarians, why it matters to, to them individually, their communities. And, as Robin says, and I agree, it's the fundamental underpinning of a healthy democracy. So we can't afford for the system not to work. It has to, be fit for purpose. It has to be modernized. And it has to allow, whatever the outcome, it has to allow people like Dr. Fallis the right to exercise, the opportunity to exercise their right to access to information, and institutions a fair opportunity to respond when there are, legitimate exemptions that apply and that the law has recognized and are important to uphold as well. So, in all, I think it is fundamentally important, and I want to congratulate Robin and Tom for really bringing light to this issue.
Brooks, let me just understand from you a little more. Why was it important to you to make that Freedom of Information request and get the information that you were after?
So 2 things. I think the first is just for myself wanting to understand what was happening in the background and understand the truth, particularly when the hospital had flipped on what they told me. I put a lot into that first year of the pandemic. I really, tried to do as much as I possibly could to impact not only within the ICU and how we were treating patients, but to try to impact how we responded, and knowing that the quality of our response was going to impact the number of people who died. So to me, to put that much into it and then to lose my job when they said, you did a great job, but we just don't like the way this fits with our image, essentially. To lose my job like that was pretty upsetting to me. So to get to the bottom of that information was important for me. But secondly, we're talking about democracy and how things run. A hospital needs to be able to stand on its own in a public healthcare system, and leaders within the hospital, doctors, nurses, other leaders need to be able to speak publicly about issues that they see in the healthcare system.
I wonder if anything's changed in the intervening months to make you slightly more optimistic about where Canada's at today.
I'd actually be sad to say significantly more pessimistic. I don't think the last 6 months have been very, very good for Canada. I think we're seeing some real sort of challenges in terms of our national integrity. This idea that there's an idea of Canada is something I grew up with in the 70s and the 80s, and sort of going through all the political turmoil of that time, and everybody was getting all excited about what is Canada and how does it work, and multiculturalism and immigration, and all those kinds of things. I think we've actually got a bit of a turning point now, and the whole world is going through a lot of changes. Finland's going through some of these challenges, same with Norway, same with Japan, but Canada seems to me to be particularly vulnerable to the things that we see happening. I'm not at all convinced we're going in the right direction. There's no national vision. There's not even a discussion about a national vision. Our politics at the federal and provincial level have become bribery politics. How much money can I promise? How many lower your taxes or raise your annual payments? There's not much there anymore. I don't see people in this country coming together and gelling around any kind of a central idea. Let me use one example. We've had a massive increase in immigration, which I will say has been wonderfully beneficial for Canada as a whole, really since the 1970s and even before then. Immigration is a real strength of this country. But we've increased the numbers so fast that we haven't even given much thought to it. All the people are pouring into a handful of 5 or 6 cities, and the smaller places are getting discouraged and getting left behind. And I'll end with this. I think Canada has one of the lowest costs of citizenship of any country in the world. We expect virtually nothing from our citizens. And as a consequence, our citizens feel no obligation to think about the country's future, to worry about the Maritimes, to think about what's going on in Nunavut, to be concerned about the involvement of the new Canadians in our economy and our society. We've got some real work ahead of us.
All right, let's get some feedback on that thesis. Margaret McMillan, as a Canadian with a perch in the United Kingdom, I wonder whether you see a Canada as a country without a centre and a purpose.
Well, Ken is right. We've always wondered about who we are. We've always wondered about where we're going. I do find, I come back to Canada a lot. I live part of the year in the UK and part of the year in Canada. When I come back, I would sometimes think, looking at the Canadian media, that I'm living in one of the most miserable countries in the world. We're very good at criticizing ourselves and very good at being down on ourselves. And perhaps we need to do more. We need to worry about what's wrong with us, but I think we need to do more about the things we're very good at. I mean, we are a very decent country. We have a rule of law. We certainly have divisions, but we've managed to deal with them so far in a civilized way, in a kindly way. I think, basically, I think we're well-intentioned towards each other. And I'm worried about, yes, I know we need a national purpose, but be careful what you wish for. Think of the countries that have had strong national purposes. That hasn't always been good. It has often led to diminishing the respect for the opinions of others. So I am worried about the country, perhaps not as much as Ken, but I do know that something of what he says is something that I certainly feel as well. But I also think we need to do more to look at the good sides of the country.
Paul Wells, I'd like to draw your attention to a poll that was taken last February in which the question was asked, does it feel to you like everything is broken in the country right now? And 2/3 of Canadians signed on to that. 2/3 said yes. Now, from your vantage point, is that midwinter post-pandemic blues, or is it something more?
A bit of both. I do think there's something quite substantially post-pandemic about the current malaise that is arguably gripping the country. I have been covering politics for 30 years, and I've been following it for more than 40. And I think you've almost at any point during that time, you would have been able to gather a quorum for the proposition that Canada was on the brink of disaster and richly deserved to be. When Ken says that Canada is a nation of mercenaries united by bribery, I wonder what the downside is. But I do think that perhaps more than usual, the sort of founding assumptions of the country have been called into pressing question by the continued claim of Canada's Indigenous peoples, by the suddenly very dissonant example of the United States across the border. I mean, Canadians used to think that they were more or less Americans, but maybe not quite as much. And the Trump adventure, which many Americans seem tempted to revisit and continue, has been rattling for a lot of Canadians. Add on the fact that for the last month or so, the air in most of central Canada has been essentially unbreathable. And there's a sense that not only that the current government federally is rudderless, but that the main pretender to replace that government doesn't seem to have much of a plan either. Yeah, there's cause for concern.
There are parts of this country that are uninsurable today?
Correct. As Craig was saying, 10% of Canadian homes across Canada are uninsurable for flood risk, which means they can still get home insurance, but they're not covered if they have a major flood event caused by an extreme weather event.
And the insurance companies have determined that these places are uninsurable. Why?
They've obviously done the statistics, they've run the calculations, but I believe we're actually in a very good place here in Canada because we've actually developed well-informed standards, guidelines, and tools to build a more resilient Canada. We know what to do at the level of the home and community to reduce these key physical climate risks, flooding, wildfire, and extreme heat. What we need to do is deploy them across Canada as quickly as possible to maintain that insurability and stability of the Canadian housing market.
More on that as we continue our conversation. Daniel, why don't you come in here? Tell us how you see the scene right now.
Sure. I mean, it's concerning that there are parts of the country where property is already tough to insure because of the risk of loss is high and the reconstruction costs are also rising. Insurance is a business. You know, if premiums collected by a company can't cover its payouts and expenses, it quite rationally will exit those markets. And as Craig and Catherine has said, fortunately, Canada's insurance market hasn't seen the same volatility as in the United States, but we can't be complacent. You know, climate risk is real and it's increasing and we need to manage it.
Well, since you mentioned the United States, let me give an example here from California, where apparently State Farm has recently announced that it's going to stop selling new insurance policies because of the increasing likelihood of wildfires. Okay, Craig, follow up on this if you would. Where are the places in Canada right now where the risk of wildfire is so concerning that we may be going down that road as well?
Well, we haven't really seen it in any part of the country yet. Luckily for us, wildfire is still considered an accident no matter where you live in the country. Our emergency response, frankly, has been excellent. In 2018, all of the interior of British Columbia burned, but we lost only 300 structures. You saw the response earlier this year in Nova Scotia. We're pretty good at limiting damage. So far, the country, in terms of wildfire, no particular part of the country is viewed by insurers as uninsurable now or in the near future. But, that could change.
Well, that's comforting news. But on the other hand, Daniel, do you think it's fair to say that these extreme weather events are only going to be increasing in number as we go forward?
That's certainly what's projected. We're going to see drier, warmer, wilder conditions, and we need to make sure that we're implementing all the tools that we can, as Catherine said, to make sure that we're building resilience in this changing climate.
Catherine, how much do you think homeowners understand what's going on out there right now?
I think there are there's limited information available that is up to date that can inform homeowners of what is actually going on. I think there's a great opportunity in Canada to provide more information to identify where risks are. We could have a portal where you could put in your postal code to be able to identify what the key risks are within a given community.
You don't have that yet?
We don't have that yet.
Who should do that?
I'm sure Craig could speak to that probably a little bit better, but I think this is an all-of-society approach. We need all levels of government. We need public and private partnerships. We need to be updating risk maps. So if you look at flood risk maps across Canada, they're 20 to 25 years out of date. But in my opinion, that's only one part of the puzzle. We need to identify the risks and what risks are within given regions, but we also need those resources to tell people what to do about it. Because we can't just say, well, you have a risk and do nothing about it. You need to identify those risks and what resources are available to reduce those risks.
Craig, that idea, put your postal code into a website, seems pretty simple. How come we haven't got that yet?
it's a super interesting answer. It was actually funded in the federal budget about 4 years ago. Public Safety Canada looked into it at that time, ran into issues of liability concerns, had to take a step back, and then has now reapproached it. And in the most recent federal budget, in fact, funding was announced for that exact portal. They're hoping to get it up and running over the next 2 years. They're going to start with flooding, but make sure that it can be expanded to address other risks. And Catherine is dead on. It starts with consumer awareness. It starts with Canadians being able to quickly access information about what the risk is and what they can do about it. And to answer your question, federal government obviously is the best place to take leadership, but we all have a responsibility in communicating. Whether you're a bank, a realtor, an insurer, we should all be reinforcing this information in our regular contact points with our customers.
We have a new head coach here. This is a photo of Darko with Raptors president Masai Ujiri. Katie, how different will he be from Nurse?
I think very different. I mean, you could go back to maybe the early days of Nurse's tenure, or even go back farther to when Nick was an assistant with the team. Again, to just touch on that developmental caliber. Darko's been a coach for almost 2 decades now. He's coached he's coached internationally. He's coached with OKC, the Memphis Grizzlies, and now Toronto. I think he's such an energetic guy. He's a bit younger. He's very relentlessly positive, which again, I feel like is something that the team just needs in spades right now. So from what we saw, we were at his introductory presser, just he's so excited to be here, so thrilled to be here. I think the organization setting up such an event to welcome him also shows that they're really willing to turn over a new leaf for him. And I mean, they've brought Gemma Malela back, who was with the Warriors, another developmental asset, and just again, relentlessly positive. But we've been around him like a relentlessly positive guy. All of this to me speaks so well for the kind of chemistry rebuild that I think the team needs right now.
You say rebuild. It's not unusual for Masai to go off the board. There were a lot of big names for head coaches this summer. He goes with someone that a lot of people were like, who's that? Obviously has the credentials there, but a lot of people digging. I'm curious, does this decision to hire Darko change sort of the direction of the team? We talk about player development, that's where he's at. Are we at instant success? Are we contending? Where do we stand on that?
Yeah, I think the Raptors are still deciding on that. I think when they look at what they have to do in free agency, that'll have a big say in terms of being able to bring back Fred VanVleet and Jakob Poeltl. But I think they wanted a coach who was comfortable going either way. And so with Darko Rajakovic's history, they probably said, hey, the team last year they didn't fulfill their potential. So if we get the vibes right, if we get the positivity back, what does this team look like? And then if they're still underperforming, then you can go from there. I think that's the way they're leaning right now. And then if it comes to it, and again, you look at Darko Rajakovic, for all the experience he has, he doesn't have head coaching experience. You look at the assistants that they've brought in, none of them have head coaching experience. And so that does leave a bit of a concern in terms of trying to win at the highest level. And so if they aren't able to get things right off the top and say, you're 20 games into the season and you only have, 7 or 8 wins, then there's going to be a lot of questions asked.
I will quickly just add that, just to push back on you a little, Nurse obviously didn't have head coaching experience at that time in the NBA. So I think the Raptors, I really like them going outside of what we would call this insular NBA head coaching pool, which sometimes gets to feel like musical chairs a little bit when you see the same names pop up for team after team. Obviously, it can be a tried and true method. It works for some franchises, but I think it works for very established franchises, which already probably have a few superstars in place. That never hurts. So I think I like Toronto taking, it also feels disingenuous to say they're taking a chance on this guy because he's got the credentials. But I think to really turn over a new leaf in this way, I got a lot of confidence in the guy.
That's just some of what we covered this week. You can find more, including the full conversations, on our website, TVO.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.